Hello, everybody. I'm here with John Bell, an ordained United Methodist pastor. John became interested in Bowen theory after hearing Peter Steinke say, good leadership rises above the anxiety of the group. He has spent the last 30 years putting these theoretical words to practice in congregational, family, and civic life. In addition to training clergy, and mentoring clergy, John works with nonprofit leaders and organizations who have an interest in sustainable and adaptive practices. John and his wife Alison work and live near Chicago, Illinois, and have three grown children. Welcome to the podcast, John.
Well, thanks, Carol, for having me. It's great to be here.
I'm so happy here. Is it getting cold in Illinois and Chicago right now?
It's starting to get a little chillier. Yep. And but the leaves are starting to change and we're headed into the fall, so it's a nice time to be here.
Yeah. Does it get pretty where you are?
It
Do you have a lot
it
of
does.
foliage and everything?
Yeah. Yeah, it
Yeah.
does. Yeah. Yeah, all through. I'm in northern Illinois, outside of Chicago. And yeah, it does get really pretty. A lot of people go up to Wisconsin, Michigan to see the colors change, but it's pretty here too.
No, that's nice. That's very cool. So John, just tell me a little bit about what you're doing now. I think we were talking a little bit before about working with nonprofits.
Yeah, well, my main job is I'm a United Methodist pastor, and I've been using theory for a long time to help with that effort, and I've also done quite a bit of training over the years with clergy. But I've been interested lately about working and spreading out a little bit further into nonprofits. And I think that comes from the fact that as a pastor, it's been really important for me to collaborate with different organizations in the community. And it's important because I think both the community benefits and the church benefits from those kind of collaborations. But as I've been doing that work, I've found that some people are and organizations are really open to it, but others just really struggle to make that happen.
Mm,
They either have the desire to do it, but can't figure out how to get their organization to do it, or the organization just doesn't have any interest in it. And I've been thinking a lot about what goes into a more collaborative effort between different nonprofits and organizations, including the government and the different agencies in the government, churches, social workers, education, um, all the nonprofit spheres. How do we all come together to do a better job of collaborating? It just seems like as a society, we're better off when we're all collaborating rather than being competitive with each other.
mm. Is there a balance between like, because I don't know, there's something about competition that drives things forward to some degree. You know, people improve, want to get better. How does collaboration kind of uh, how does that fit into this idea of growth and benefit for all parties?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think about sports, when you watch two teams sort of going at it competitively, baseball right now and football, but as you watch people play at the end of the game, usually, not always, but usually, you see a lot of handshakes and hugs. Off season, I think a lot of athletes are collaborating and working together kind of behind the scenes, talking to each other. I think the competition's on the field, and I think it's helpful. Certainly, competition drives best practices typically. So,
Hmm.
there's even around some funding that nonprofits get, there's an effort to try to figure out best practices. And so there's funding
Mm,
for people to experiment and figure out what works best. That all I think benefits everyone. Um, but I think where that kind of goes off the rails is when the competition does not contain those sort of relationship factors where people are connected and sharing resources and information.
Mm,
because no one organization or individual knows all the answers. And no one organization or individual has a complete perspective on what's happening in society. And so you really need a lot of different voices, a lot of different perspectives to really understand a problem. In fact, I think the best problem solving is when you can get the most sort of brains around a problem and working together to figure it out. I think that's always been true. You can still have competition in that scenario, but you really do need to have a collaborative piece.
mm. It's almost like if competition becomes the end game, it can be it, it can have the opposite effect. It can create rigidness, staticness, regression
Right.
in some way. Uh,
Yeah. Which is
but
interesting because I would
yeah.
just say that I think people who are driven by competition think the same way. That that if there's not competition, things get static and
Oh,
which
interesting.
yeah, which I don't think is true, but I think that's the fear as well.
Mm. So you need the it's you need both in some ways. You need the collaboration, and then alongside that or within that, you can have the competition to improve to for the benefit of everyone. I guess would be the idea.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, I think just in terms of the natural world, you see all kinds of examples of this. I mean, there's a
Mm.
competitive piece to the natural world, which I think is really important because it keeps people, keeps all of nature adapting. The those that adapt and are flexible and find new ways tend to survive and do better. But you also see this collaborative or symbiosis that goes on where the nature's dependent on other parts of nature to survive. So they're both there and they're both important. You
Mm.
need both.
I love that idea that to kind of recognizing that you have this realistic dependence on other people in your life as it, or
Mhm.
in organizations in terms of organizations
Yeah,
uh, that we're not isolated little units,
yeah,
and
exactly.
yeah, and when we think that way, it can be so problematic. We were talking earlier about the pandemic. I think one of the challenges of the pandemic was just everybody felt like isolated units,
Hmm.
uh, or they were operating that way at least.
Yeah. Oh, I think that's right. Yeah, and um, just putting on my church hat, that's been the biggest issue for faith communities is
Mm,
that people sort of kind of lost sight of the importance of community of coming together. There's something nice about being at home in your pajamas, watching videos, right? And not having to, get all ready and get out the door and have to deal with people. But I think we've sort of forgotten the importance of getting together, how useful that is. Uh,
hmm.
and yeah, so much to say about that. But yeah, I do think that we've sort of lost track of the importance of people coming together, working together.
Yeah. What do you think it is? I mean, it's a weird thing, just being around other people is useful in some way.
Hmm.
It's like I don't know. I mean, I get the fact that if you think about it in terms of evolution, when you're in a group, you have more resources, more available to adapt and survive. I can understand that. But there's also just something about being around other people that feels good,
Hmm.
or it can anyway.
Yeah. No, I think it's a complicated question, I think. Or I mean, I think the answer is complicated. Certainly, humans have this wonderful prefrontal cortex that's grown and evolved and is what makes us unique, in the world. And helps us to be in tune with things that a lot of the rest of nature is not. You had read that quote from Peter Steinke, who was important to me, but he used to call the prefrontal cortex the heavenly lobes, because he said, only humans are really, it seems like only humans are the ones who have some sense of a divine or sort of like other presence. But that prefrontal cortex is so important. And we go between the Nobel Peace Prize winner for economics was Kahneman. Is that his name, Kahneman?
I, bel
Yeah,
I believe
yeah. He
so.
had this idea of two tracks where your brain is sort of on an automatic track, doing sort of the automatic thing, and then on a more sort of thoughtful, reflective track. The first track's way quicker, just happens automatically. The second track requires a little bit more thought, time, energy, stepping back. But I think we're very susceptible to what track the people around us are on.
Mm,
People that are on sort of track one who are just sort of focused, automatic, just working really hard on something, but not really thinking about it, just sort of going along. You can get sucked up into that too, I think, and just find
absolutely.
yourself, automatically reacting to things and responding. But when you run into somebody who's on track, who's using sort of track two, who's sort of stopping, being a little bit more thoughtful, really engaging that prefrontal cortex, that seems to have an impact on people around them, where they too will sort of stop
Mm,
and think about, what's going on around them and how they're responding. Not always and not for everyone, but um, yeah, so I think that we're very social creatures in the sense that we pick up very quickly what's going on around us. Um, and that's
mm,
why, I think doing the work of understanding how your brain works, how you're interacting with other people, how they're experiencing you, how you're experiencing them, that effort, I think is contagious in the sense that other people pick up on it too.
yeah, I think it's incredibly contagious. And I like this idea that we're in the group, and that group can function in a way. If we're all operating automatically, we can just keep down this track where we're droning on, and it's not necessarily helpful. And in fact, it
Hmm.
can be if you introduce anxiety to that, it can be contagious, and then it's an anxious group, you
Hmm.
know.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if you have somebody that's thoughtful in there, that too can spread out. Um, I think that's happening all the time these days, where
Hmm.
a lot of anxiety spreading through groups.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's yeah, certainly a difficult time. There's just so much going on in the world that it's so important to just be able to step back and to just try to get some clarity for oneself. Um, but yeah, it's just a challenge. Time is really challenging. I think people are pretty stressed out, um, regardless of sort of what your politics are, your religion, or your economic situation. I think
Hmm.
everybody's just pretty stressed out. And I hadn't thought about this before, but sort of that collaborative, competitive nature is sort of useful when you have like group think because you can sort of get lost in the collaborative effort in a group situation, right? Where you're just
Hmm.
going along either to get along or to get something done. You're aware that something's not right and probably something needs to change. But if you're sort of just collaborating, you don't want to disrupt, you don't want to rock the boat. But sometimes you got to say that something's not working right, or we need to change what we're doing. That's sort of a competitive. You've got to sort of challenge other people in what they're doing, and how you do that is a whole nother conversation. Uh, then, but you can get people who are pretty siloed today now, who are just doing their own thing, don't want to be around other people. But then you lose again the resources of the collaborative effort. So.
Mm.
Yeah, it's a challenge, or just is a very challenging time. It's not clear like where we're going to go with it, or what's going to happen. But we seem to be in a pretty competitive state in terms, especially here in the U.S. right now. Um, and not much. It's hard. The collaboration is happening, but it's hard to see it.
Oh, that's a great way to put it. Because there's so much of my side's right, your side's wrong, in so
Hmm.
many contexts. And but there is collaboration going on. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
true. And how do you bring it into your own life, I guess is one thing. And then
Hmm.
start to see it, maybe it'll spread, you know.
Hmm.
Uh, John, how you said something interesting, which is kind of that one thing you can do is slow down and distinguish things in your own internal system. You know, how do you start to do that? That sounds like a daunting task.
Right. Yes. Well, yeah, the good news and the bad news is that it takes time. That yeah, it really does take time. Um, I've been working at this for, probably good 20, 25 years, and yeah, it's really hard to slow down and to see what's going on. Um, and I think it's just step by step. I don't, you can't just step into it and say, "Oh, I'm gonna step back and see everything." It just doesn't work that way. You really just have to take it day by day, step by step. And I don't know how you teach awareness. Um, it's a tricky thing, but if you can just get a little bit of awareness going and be able to step back, but it requires slowing the processes down in your brain, and
Mm.
just taking a moment to think, and to break down conversations and interactions and thought processes. It's just an effort to try to slow things down. And people have different ways of doing that. Some people go for a walk. Some people sit in a faith community, right? Some people listen to music. People do meditation, yoga. These are all efforts to just take a moment, and try to slow the mental processes down, because they can be pretty, your brain's moving pretty quickly, doing a lot of processing. So any way to do that is useful. But then over time, you're sort of building on structures, I think, or building on processes. So over time,
Mm.
as you do this work, you start to get a little bit better. You start to catch yourself. Um, I think for people, especially those who are struggling like with addictions, part of it is just being able to catch yourself when you're about to, when you start sort of craving and having the addiction, kind of what's the thought process, what's the level of
Mhm.
stress, what's going on environmentally around you, just can you pay attention to those kind of triggers and keys. But it's the same thing when you're trying to relate to like your children or your spouse,
Mm.
everybody knows sort of the way the conversations will go and how you get stuck in those conversations. But then can you step back and kind of replay those conversations to see where you can identify how things went off the rails or what started to go off the rails? And you can't really people love to tell other people what they did wrong, and what they need to do differently, right? But um, how do you take responsibility for your part in it and begin to change the part that you play? But that's really hard. I mean, it takes a lot of time to figure that out. It's not something that happens uh, right away. And how you do it, I think, is probably just trial and error. You know,
Mm.
that's a Victoria Harrison has that phrase that most of this work is trial and error. And if it doesn't work, you just figure out what to do differently and try that. And if that doesn't work, you try something different. But yeah, it's definitely a learning curve. Anyway,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, no, it's experimenting with your own ways of being, of doing, thinking, you know.
Yeah.
I and the pitfalls are everywhere. I think
Hmm.
I like how you said it's a learning process. Like even for me, I can this idea of taking responsibility can lead to blaming myself, you know,
Hmm. Right.
which would be a pitfall,
Right.
Take
Right.
responsibility, but don't
Hmm.
get caught up in getting stuck
Yeah.
somehow.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I was just thinking, I'm at a place where like I can tell when I'm not at a good place. And then I make a decision about, well, I'm just not going to be in a good place, or I'm going to actually stop and figure out what I need to do.
Hmm.
But I wonder, like, what have you found that's useful, or how do you get some traction on that?
Well, for me, it's kind of been I think in life, I think in the past I've had a tendency to just pretend things were okay, you
Hmm.
know. And so one thing that I've been working on is just this idea of just kind of being aware that I'm having negative emotions or that I'm feeling a certain way about something, just acknowledging it, accepting it. Doesn't mean I have to do anything with it necessarily. Uh, but if I'm not pushing it down and pretending it doesn't exist, I find that that process of it, acknowledging it helps me move forward
Hmm.
without holding on to something in an
Yeah,
unhelpful way.
yeah, yeah. And would you say that that there's like an effort to try to just let things be like it is what it is sort of the saying. But I mean, is there an
Mhm.
effort there for you, like where you have to sort of get a little bit more like step back from it to be able to do that, or how do you think about that?
Yeah, I think internally, I kind of try to take a step back, be a little bit more observant of it, not blame myself. I try to drop the
Mhm.
blame,
Yeah.
you know. Uh, I'm really good at self-punishment,
Hmm.
put myself in the corner with a little cap on.
Yeah, very good. I hear you.
But
Yeah.
so I try to drop that. So I'm taking a step back internally and just kind of watching whatever played out and saying, okay, that's how that played out. And then having a vision or at least an idea of a direction to move, what I'd like to do different.
Hmm.
And so letting things be and then trying to say, okay, how do I move in the different direction
Hmm.
toward
Yeah, I
whatever
like
that
that.
that
Hmm.
vision is.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I like that. That's a really useful, I think, tool just to be able to say, what do I need to be doing right now? That's different than what's happening. Yeah. Yeah, I like that idea. I think that is true. Hmm.
Yeah. John, how did you get into the ministry?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's a fairly long story, but I can try to do a short version of it.
Well, short, long, whatever.
Um, yeah, church was a very important place for my parents, and
Mm.
being involved with church was very important. Um, my parents, I have an older brother, and then between my brother and me, before I was born, there was another brother. He died when he was 4, and I was born just after that. And the church was, well, not just the church, but my parents' faith was really pivotal for them, got them through that difficult time. They both talk about the ways in which God was present with them and how it was moving. Their faith was very moving for them at that time. And the church also was just there for them as a community, walking with them through that process. It was a very difficult time. And so I grew up in that same faith community, and everybody knew our story. And so my birth sort of had some special pieces to it, elements to it,
Mm.
coming on the heels of that. And but my parents had all of these deep relationships with folks in that congregation because of that experience. And those deep relationships impacted me. I mean, those people also had, a deep relationship with me. And so I grew up sort of finding myself spending most of my free time at the church, involved with different programs, but that people would, mentor me as I was growing up. And I just had a very wonderful experience in the church. Um, and would go to camp in the summers. And for me, the last summer I went to camp, I was on staff and watched all summer long. These pastors would come through and stay at the camp with their families, and I got to interact with these pastors and thought, that I thought maybe I'd want to do something in church life because the sense of community and the way people worked together and came together was really impactful for me. And yeah, I think I came out of that summer thinking, I think this is maybe something I want to do. And so I just
Mm.
started following that out, went to college. And then when I was in college, I decided to go to seminary and to study. And yeah, sort of one thing led to another. I never had like that magic moment some people talk about where they're like, this is what I'm supposed to do. But it just felt right always, like felt like I was going in the right direction. The other option was to go into music, actually.
Really?
But yeah, and that's what my older brother is doing. He actually teaches now music theater. But I watched him being 9 years older than me come out of college and just saw how much he struggled. He's super talented, amazingly talented. And I watched him struggle, and I thought I'm not even close to as talented as he is. I thought I'm never going to make it or cut it as a musician. So, but I've always played and enjoyed music, and it's something that I carry with me. And
Hmm.
I love to play and sing and be a part and go to concerts. But yeah, it just seemed like the ministry piece was something I was more kind of cut out for.
So interesting. But in both instances, you're connecting with people and entertaining to some degree. You gotta
Mhm.
put it out there. What do you play? What's your instrument?
Well, I learned piano when I was real little, and then I moved into percussion like around fourth, fifth grade. And then I just started focusing on the vibes, which is a jazz instrument typically used in jazz. And so in high school and college, I played jazz. And I haven't played the vibes in a long time. I still sit down at the piano and play. Um, and I've been blessed to be in congregations that are just steeped in people's musical talents. So I don't have to do a
Ah,
lot of it in the congregations I serve. I'm happy to let other people do it. And I enjoy hearing people sing.
uh,
But I also know the importance of music and how moving it is. And so I certainly try to find ways to incorporate it into worship and the things that I do,
mm,
folks.
mm. What is it about music that um, kind of uh, connects people in some way to I don't know, like a to God, to a universal process, to something outside of themselves?
Yeah.
You've been around it your whole life.
Yeah. Well, I'd encourage you to get Mike Sullivan on here. I don't know if you know Mike. He's up in Traverse City, Michigan, but he's got a lot of good ideas about music and its impact on us and our functioning. But I don't know. I've heard people talk about sort of the vibrations of music are somehow sort of connected to the vibrations of the cosmos. The ways
Uh,
that um, atoms and electrons and quarks and all that stuff, how all of that vibrates. I think that there's probably something to that. And from what I know from evolution, that seems that though the hearing is the first sort of sensory device that really takes off in the development of species, and so our hearing is probably the hardest wired to our brain.
uh,
So we hear things first before we see them, or at least we process the sound first before we see things and process it. So, I think just fundamentally, sound is kind of we're just hardwired for sound.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm. Sound in rhythms, the beats.
Yeah.
I think I forgot which poet it was. I heard him talk one time, was talking about the heartbeat is like the drum
hmm
beat,
hmm
you know, and that's why we were attracted to it in kind of the lyrical poetry, especially that was an oral tradition for so long,
hmm
told
Yeah.
stories
Yeah.
they told stories to a drum too,
hmm Yeah, I think the people that we like to listen to the most have a certain cadence to their speech, the way that they talk. There's sort of a rhythm to it.
Mm,
I think, and people find that useful. In a congregation I served, because of my background in percussion, I know how to play a djembe, which is an African drum.
uh-huh.
It's got you can carry it around or hold it, but it's usually got a skin over the top and an open end on the bottom. And I would do a drum circle with the kids at the church. And what was really useful was particularly kids that are sort of have some issues with attention or focus, or at least focusing in on what's happening around them. And kids that are pretty wound up, and pretty excited all the time. What was useful is we could do these exercises on the djembe. One of them was a really interesting exercise where you sort of everybody sort of taps together in unison and you do it slowly. And then as you go, you begin to speed up. And then you speed up and speed up and speed up. And eventually you can't keep a unified pattern going at a certain speed. And then everybody's
Mhm.
just playing as fast as they can. And then you let that go for a few seconds, and then you start to slow down again, and you invite everybody to play at the same pace, and you get slower and slower and slower. And that just seems to have a calming effect on people and the kids
Mm,
too. So the kids were the most wound up, when we did that exercise, they would tend to be able to relax a little bit more and focus a little bit more.
mm,
Um, and then we would challenge them to, in playing like a drum circle, everybody has sort of a different rhythm that they're playing. And you can play those in groups, but there are different groups playing different rhythms. And the ability to have to focus, think about the part that you're going to play, and then to be able to play it while others are playing something different is a really useful exercise for focusing and concentration. So yeah, I think there are ways in which music and rhythm can be really useful to us in terms of our own functioning.
mm. And I like that idea also of playing with other people. It's like can't it it makes cooperation and collaboration like a challenge.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Can I listen, pay attention enough to be able to work well with these people
Right. Yeah.
and get
Yeah.
I had a friend growing up. Well, we were in college, and I was learning guitar a little bit. He was really good at it. Um, but I remember we would try to play together, and I'm not great, and he would get so frustrated. But I learned to appreciate how difficult it is to play an instrument with a group of people.
Mm,
It's not easy
right.
to be able to stay in time and tune and
hmm
you know
hmm
and to collaborate in that way.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, anyone who's played in a like a band or like with a group of people, yeah, it's a really useful experience. Um, and you also learn how to respect each other and
Hmm.
to work together. Yeah, we need more of those kind of opportunities in the
Uh,
world, right? Yeah.
yeah. Uh, Especially maybe in just the education system growing up,
hmm
getting getting people to collaborate more.
hmm hmm
Mm, uh, Interesting. So coming back to your story about becoming a minister, you were this. It seems like you were pretty important to your mom and dad and the community in a lot of ways.
hmm
Um, Was there was my guess would be there was a benefit to that. Was there a challenge in it as well to being a kind of a special one in some way?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. I mean, lots of challenges. I don't think we have enough time to cover all the challenges. Yeah. I mean, I think just in general, the effort over the years is to sort of have a broom and sort of sweep away that when it
Mm,
comes at you, that kind of moniker is important. Um, but I think the specialness was really more of a focus of is an anxious focus. I mean that people are paying attention to you a lot more. They're watching you. They're invested in you and interested in you, but in a way that's sort of um, over and above what is needed. Um, and that I think there's some dependency that gets placed on that too, that if something is very meaningful and special to you, you end up having this sort of dependency on it as well.
mhm,
And even look to it for comfort or for hope or whatever. And so there becomes this sort of obligation or responsibility with it it's sometimes difficult to carry around. Um,
mm,
I it's certainly nice to be in the spotlight, and to have people like you and to say nice things about you. Um, but it's also when you're used to that, it's hard to hear criticism or yeah. And you had said earlier about self-blame. I think when you're identified as someone who's sort of special for whatever reason, if things aren't going well, you can tend to blame yourself for that. Well, it must be my fault, or I must have done something wrong um, to cause this, or for everybody to be unhappy, or everybody's happiness is sort of dependent on you. Those are all sort of extreme ideas. Um, but yeah, but for me, it's moving out of the ways in which we sort of identify or label people and just being able to see people for who they are,
mm,
and to see who they are as they are, and not sort of fantasize that we wish or hope or think that they are this way, but in reality, they're really this way. And also not to be overly critical. We can that can go the other way where you get to sort of blaming people or criticizing them for the way that they are, but to really understand that that's just who they are, because of
mm.
the way they were brought up or their environment or life challenges. But this is just who they are, and to be able just to sit and be with people as they are without these sort of monikers of sort of the rebel or the problem or the black sheep or the special golden child, or right. It's just moving away from all of that and trying just to relate to people as they are.
Yeah, how has that been a part of your process in kind of as a minister sitting just with the congregation in a different way?
Hmm. Yeah, I think yeah, Ed Friedman, who was a rabbi who studied with Murray Bowen, was, I think, initially very useful to me around this. Um, because Ed was quite a performer. He was kind of a jokester. Um, he liked to just be very playful in the way he talked about these things.
He
But
was a rabbi, right? He
he
was a
was a
rabbi.
rabbi, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But he would say that you got to be careful at the end of the service of people who come up to you and tell you how great you are, because and then he would say things like that criticism is a form of pursuit, where people
Mm,
are kind of wanting to be in a relationship with you, but they do it kind of on a negative valence, which is where they're kind of just pursuing you in a negative way to get your attention. Um, so it's been useful for me to just um, not take all of the sort of the pat on the back, well done stuff too seriously, and also not to take the criticism too seriously. but to really be evaluating for myself how I'm doing, be thinking for myself, am I doing a good job? How would I mark that for myself? How would I know? And paying attention to those things. But at the end of the service, what I've started to do in the last couple years is when people come up to you and say, "Well, I didn't like that," they'll tell you why, they didn't like it, or like something I said or something in the service. Doesn't happen a lot, but occasionally somebody will say, "I didn't really like that," and they'll tell you why, which is good. I appreciate the feedback. But then people will say, "Oh, well, that was a great sermon, or that was a great message, or that was a great worship service," and then they just walk on. And so lately, what I've been doing is saying to them, "Well, tell me why, or tell me
Mm,
what was it about the message or the service that you really liked that really connected with you?" And initially, when I do that with folks, a lot of folks will just sort of look at me because they haven't really like put it into words. They just have a sense that it was really useful to them, and they'll say, "Oh, I don't know. That's a good question." But then what people eventually figure out is that if they're going to come tell me something about how something was good or not good, they have to be ready to tell me
mm,
what was it like, because that feedback is helpful to me, especially if it was good to know, well, what was good about it? Like, what did they get out of it? And what can we do in the future that, was helpful to you? So, but really getting people to get some words on the page around what their experiences are has been helpful for me. It gets me out of that position of being a good pastor or preacher or a terrible pastor or preacher, depending on the day.
that's great. And it also puts the other person in the position of having to articulate their thinking.
Yes.
Not just giving an emotive reaction to it, feeling reaction, but to say have to do some processing on their end too.
Hmm.
Uh, it's uh, interesting intervention.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Uh,
I mean, that's life. I think that's the way life works is you got to figure out ways to work through these challenges that we come up against, right?
mm, kind of finding ways to not get stuck in I don't know, static patterns.
Hmm.
You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, you got to get creative. You know,
Hmm.
it's so interesting because this, you know, and what works for a little while might not work later.
Hmm. Right.
So you got to change it and tweak it and
Hmm.
keep growing in that way.
Hmm. Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm. Do you have uh, a good story of either working with a congregation you've headed or with congregational leadership where somebody took on kind of working on themselves in that aspect?
Um, yeah, I mean, just lots of examples of that. Um, yeah, I remember I was serving a church about the time of Hurricane Katrina. And yeah, I had a member of the church who sort of had this sort of estranged relationship with both of her parents. I don't remember what the mom situation was, which mom had had some troubling, I think her parents were divorced and mom had had some challenges too. Um, but I went down and with a bunch of us down to New Orleans area to serve to help with the cleanup after Katrina.
Mm,
And one of her parents well, both of her parents were down there. And I got connected with one of them. I think she had reached out to one of them and said, "Hey, this group's going to be here. You should stop by and see them. They're from my church." And so the one parent did, but the other, I think, was really struggling after Katrina. They were, I think, going to end up homeless. I think
mm,
with the FEMA effort was sort of short term, and there wasn't really a long term plan for that. And so this woman from the congregation sort of re-engaged her mom and decided to figure out how to relate to her. And so started being more in contact with her over time, and eventually invited her mom to move back up to where she is, close to where she is, and started this relation, kind of rebooting the relationship with her mom. But she put a
Mm,
lot of work into that, a lot of effort. I was in the privileged position of watching her do that, watching her make that effort and the difficulties and challenges and trials of it, but then really
mm,
working at having a better one-to-one relationship with her mom, and making sure she had good care up here. And yeah, I think that was someone for sure who worked hard to kind of reestablish and to reconnect and to work at figuring out how to have a good relationship with her mom.
mm,
Yeah.
mm. It always comes down to an individual effort in a relationship is,
Hmm.
you know, I find that fascinating. Like, what is whoever you're talking to, it's what are you doing about the challenge you're facing?
Yeah.
Um, and that it's so hard to think that way for yourself, let alone to, ask questions of somebody else about that.
Yeah.
You know, we're so quick to see the problem outside of us, you know,
Hmm.
or in somebody else, or
Hmm.
I don't know. So those examples always, every time I hear examples like that, it's a reminder that you always have a choice of to do something different. And,
Right. Yeah, and lots of people get hung up on forgiveness. How do you forgive somebody? Um, and I don't think of forgiveness as like an act in time. I sort of think of it as a way of life, of just the way you present yourself and move through the world, that you're always willing or able to say, I made a mistake, or boy, this is on me. I mean, even there have been times when it might not necessarily been my fault, but things fell apart so quickly that it sometimes it would just be able to come in and say, I don't know what's happened here, but I'm sorry, for whatever part I played. And just being
mm,
willing to take some of that heat so that the situation can calm down in the moment. Because I'm
mm,
interested in keeping the relationships going and figuring out how to do better and move forward. And sometimes that means just calming things down in the moment, and regrouping. And sometimes I don't mind if something goes wrong, like in my own family, if I'm in a conversation with a bunch of people and it's not going well. I could say, I'm sorry that if I'm not, doing my part, or I'm somehow contributing to this, but maybe we can regroup here. But yeah, it's just for me, it's more of a way of life, uh, of uh, of sort of toning things down and being able to reconnect and figure out what to do to move forward. Um, uh, yeah, I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but some people can get really upset about things and then they kind of blast you. They'll come at you
mhm,
really hot and heavy about something and be really angry. And I just found that if I can just sit with people in the midst of that and not get reactive to them, not I always have a footnote here around violence. Certainly, I'm not suggesting people stay put when there's violence.
mhm,
But when somebody's really upset about something, if I can just sit there and listen and kind of, even if I don't agree with them, just listen to them talk and go along, it's like it washes over. Whatever that is, that moment
mm,
sort of washes over. And then on the other side of it, we can start to have a conversation about what's really going on and what's important. But I always find there's
mm,
that initial blast, and people can get reactive to that, right? And they can throw their hands up in the air and walk away or start arguing and yelling at the other person. But if you can kind of just hang with somebody for a moment while they go through that, you can often get to the other side and sometimes, have a constructive conversation. But I think the
mm,
people that understand that the most are people who are recovering from addictions. Like I
mm,
find in church, if I'm preaching about trying to figure out how to get along with people, or how to make things work, how to make the relationships work, and taking responsibility for self, and finding ways to not make other people change, but to really change the way you relate to people. Like my folks in recovery Like they want to stand up and give a testimony. Like they're ready to go. Like they're all over it. They understand it so well. Just there's so much we can learn from people who have been through those situations because oftentimes the addiction has harmed relationships and created barriers to relationships and events that have happened in the past. And boy, it takes a long, intentional effort to rebuild those relationships and to
Mm,
set them on a path forward that's different. And you've got to be so calm and patient with folks as you go through that process with them, and understanding of why they are reacting to you the way that they are. And not to blame yourself for it, but just to have an appreciation for it. But yeah, folks in recovery get that stuff, and yeah, I love preaching to them.
yeah. Yeah. Everything else has kind of been stripped away, and you're left with yourself, and
Yeah,
you gotta work from there.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
yeah,
Work where you are, right where you are. Yeah.
absolutely. I really like this idea of forgiveness as a way of life, first of all, and as a way to move forward.
Hmm.
It's like it has this notion of forward movement in it.
Yeah.
You know, it's about resolution. Not maybe resolution is the wrong word, but about I guess moving on. Yeah, in a lot of ways. Per, yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I mean, I think that's right. And I mean, look, the goal here is problem solving. Like we've got a lot of problems to solve, both sort of globally, with the climate in our own communities, of people struggling, and in our own families. I mean, we've got to figure out, people have challenges we got to figure out. And you just, the effort is to move, how do you get to problem solving where you can really
Mm,
figure out what needs to be done? And if people are, talking about how they're slighted, which I get, like I understand this stuff, and talking about how terrible they've been treated and past grievances and, um, the festival of Festivus, what is it, the airing of grievances or whatever? Like, I sometimes feel like I'm in a church meeting, and sometimes I ought to bring out the poll, and we ought to have the festival of the airing of grievances. But I get it. People get slighted, they get hurt, they get angry and frustrated, they're embarrassed, they've been belittled or whatever. They lost out. I mean, I get all that stuff, but at the end of the day, we got to figure out what to do, and how do you get there? And the world is full of examples right now of people who battle it out and just kill each other and destroy each other. I suppose that's one way to figure things out and to problem solve, but I don't think it's the best way.
yeah.
I think getting people at a table, sitting down and figuring it out is is the best way forward. But boy, you've got to be in a mindset where you understand that figuring things out is the most important thing. And if you're in a mindset of like keeping score and tracking grievances and protecting yourself, which I get, sometimes people have to protect themselves, but if that's where you're at, it's really hard to get to any place where you're solving the larger problems.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, it sure is. I tend to bring things back to the family when I'm thinking about challenges because I can
Hmm.
understand the family a little better than
Absolutely.
society as a whole.
Yeah.
It's like if if a husband and wife if somebody's trying to win, that means there's a loser, and that's not
Hmm.
useful for a relationship. So,
Right.
you know, but how do you get, or maybe the question is, what do you do if one person's not dropping uh,
Hmm.
that idea of keeping score, of needing it there, a certain way, of not letting a grievance go, something
Yeah.
like that. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
that's tough.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. There's really nothing you can do. I mean, they've got to decide for themselves that that's what they want. And the grievances and the hurt feelings probably serve some kind of purpose. I mean, they're useful in some way. Um, but then eventually, all of that stuff. isn't useful anymore. It becomes the problem. And so that ends up becoming the problem that has to be solved, right? There's sort of the challenge that families have of adapting to environmental problems that are going on and challenges in the community, but and families are constantly trying to adapt to those. But you can have these internal problems that then that becomes the focus, right? You're trying to solve these
Mm,
problems, and we put a lot of energy into them. Even if they're not getting solved, we put a ton of energy into them, right? Managing relationships and the triangles and so to me, that energy just seems to be better spent working collaboratively together to figure things
mm,
out. I've heard some people say, asking people who are sort of carrying a grudge, how's that working for you?
yeah,
Right?
yeah.
Are you getting what you want out of it? Is the other person suffering as well in life as they are in your head? I mean, how does that how does that work in? But yeah, people just have to decide that it's not worth the energy.
Mm. I really like this idea of being problem focused or being caught up in these unhelpful patterns that we're talking about take up so much energy. And if you could just
Mhm.
shift that energy toward, um, well, this idea of forward movement, moving toward a goal, a larger purpose, it's really frees you up. Uh,
Hmm. Yeah, for sure.
yeah. Put it on managing yourself differently, right? Like
Hmm.
you were
Yeah,
talking about earlier.
yeah.
Uh, so let's take it back to collaboration with nonprofits.
Oh
Um,
gosh, yeah. I mean, so many ways. I mean, you really have to understand yourself in the context of your family. I mean, that's just the key. If you don't have any sort of understanding of how you're the product of a multi-generational process, I mean, the rest of what I'm going to say is not going to really make a lot of difference, but like that's just so important. I think what you just said is so important of understanding yourself in this context and in the family. But from there, we bring those lived experiences with us to our work and our vocations and our tendencies and our patterns and our vulnerabilities that we have in the families. We end up bringing those to the work environment. And then we end up running into people in those work settings that are just like our family members. It's so interesting. I'll talk to a pastor who will say, and you may have heard me say this, but they'll complain to me about a parishioner and talk about how terrible they are and what a burden they are and how much time and energy I have to spend dealing with them. And then I always say, well, who do they remind you of in your family? And it's almost instantaneous that they will immediately start thinking of somebody in their family that they have the same exact problem with. So we end up replicating these challenges in the family. We sort of like are highly tuned into them in the work setting. So when we run into them, just the same automatic ways get going, get kicked in. Um, but if you zoom out a little bit, the work environment has the same challenges as the family, and I've begun to think about them in terms of differences. That we have different ways of seeing the world, of understanding the world. We each bring sort of a different perspective on problems. And we all have different ideas about how to solve them or what could go into that. Some of those solutions are more sort of automatic, just trying to calm things down, but some of them are more thoughtful. But just like in the family and the work setting, you've got these challenges, often sort of stirred by changes going on outside of the organization, out in the broader society. And then you're trying to figure out how to adjust to those or how to meet those challenges and those needs. And then internally in the organization, you just get so many different ideas about what's the problem, how do you describe it, understand it, what do you do about it, what sort of best practices. And if folks are not thoughtful about that and reactive, then the problem that you're trying to solve is no longer what's going out in the broader society or in families that are coming in for help, but It's in the relationships within the organization where people are arguing and disagreeing and not talking to each other or trying
Mm,
to figure out how to work around people, all the things that go on in an office space.
mm,
So that's sort of the first problem is organizations internally have to figure out how to work well together collaboratively to not get too caught, not just not trip each other up so much, so that they can really work productively at solving whatever problems are coming in, families coming in, or whatever problems trying to be addressed out in society. Um, but then when you get out into the broader society and you've got these systemic issues going on, and you're trying to pull in some other organizations to address these broader systemic problems, you get the same issues going on where people
mm,
have different ways of understanding the problem, different ways of thinking about solutions for it. And so those differences, create this tension or this discomfort. And if people aren't paying attention to it and really working at managing it for themselves, it ends up disrupting those efforts. So I think, what goes on in the family, what goes on in like nonprofits or any really work environment, and then the collaborative effort that goes out in the broader society, I think they all stem from these struggles that are very similar to the family, where differences emerge, people get reactive to them, it creates tension, and then that becomes the problem, is what to
mm,
do about the tension that's in the family.
mm. So you can't get away from working on your on yourself.
Can't get away from it. You can be a workaholic, but you can't get away from it. You can't. I mean, you can, I suppose, there's lots of stuff out there that'll keep you distracted, but yeah, really, you can't get away from it. It's important to work on.
Mm. Well, it's interesting the what you were talking about, this almost internal collaboration, right?
Hmm.
Within the organization. People need to be working on themselves to function well as a unit, and then that contributes to functioning better with other organizations, collaborating outside of the
Right.
organization.
Yeah, for
Uh,
sure.
and not doing that gets in the way of problem solving, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And we're again, this is where the competition and collaboration come in. We're set up for a lot of competition, which is good. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think that we were talking earlier about funding. I think funders really need to pay attention to this. That
Mm,
if you're funding organizations and efforts, you really need to be paying attention to whether or not that funding is creating an overly competitive environment or if it's creating a more collaborative environment. Because that the funding can really become a very competitive thing. And then
mhm,
you hear small nonprofits just complaining about how all of these larger nonprofits get all the resources, but then complain about how their internal structures and organizations are so terrible that they can't really accomplish a lot, and how the smaller organizations are more nimble and more adaptive. That's not always true, but you have to pay attention to how the funding's getting distributed as well. That's a big piece of it. And governments and policies need to be paying attention to how whether or not policies create this more collaborative effort, and how
mm,
policymakers are welcoming broad input into problems and making sure they're getting a really holistic understanding of a problem as they're creating policies. But anyway, I mean,
mm,
there's lots of ways in which it can be done better, but lots of pitfalls.
mm. It's interesting, like almost incentivizing collaboration in
Yeah.
some way.
Yeah,
Mm,
yeah. And I think, families can do that too. If you're in a family, you can incentivize collaboration. You can invite people to share their ideas and opinions, and what they think needs to be done. And you can ask everybody to tell you, what should we be doing here? What do you think? You don't have to agree with everybody. You don't have to do what if somebody else says, but you're certainly inviting whole perspectives on the problem and the situation to get the best thinking involved into it. And I think just the act of saying to a family, hey, we need to put our best thinking caps on. We need to collaborate and work together to figure this out. It's sort of all hands on deck. I think that sets up the structures for more collaborative effort in a family, rather than parents who come into therapy because they can't agree on what to do about their child, right? And they're arguing about who's right and who's wrong and who's got the
Mhm.
best answer and what the problem is. But if they could really, and I think this is the goal of, seems to me the goal of therapy and coaching is to help them figure out how to have those conversations, and how to be clear for themselves what they think is important, but inviting others to also share what they think is important, and then figuring out what the path forward is. But you got to really tone it down, right, and calm the system down to have those kind of conversations, which is usually what can happen in a therapeutic situation.
Ideally,
Ideally, yeah.
it's so interesting. And it's so true. When things are hot, when anxiety's up, uh, people have a hell of a time getting to a collaborative place,
Yeah, for sure.
being able to listen to each other, to hear each other.
Yeah.
Um, you know. How do you get the anxiety down in that type of situation?
Um, Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, the anxiety can show up in lots of different ways. It can show up in a very sort of serious, kind of critical mode. It can also show up in a very like jovial, joking mode. I mean, I've walked into meetings where people are just laughing and telling jokes and having a great old time, but that's also an anxious response.
Response.
Yeah. Um, I think in really difficult or tense situations, I have found it useful to moderate a discussion where I invite individuals individually to go around the table and to answer a question.
Mm.
That question could be, how would you define the problem, and what do you think the solution is? And
Mm.
then disrupting any efforts for people to have a response to it so that people are just able to say what they think and to not have to worry about somebody saying, well, that's a terrible idea, or I agree, why aren't we doing this? That's the right idea. But just giving everybody an opportunity to say what's on their mind. I think that effort does have a way of kind of bringing the temperature down, because you don't have to, but it invites people to have to sit and like think about what somebody is saying,
Mhm.
and to really listen to what people are saying. Also, I think it's important to know who are the people who can manage themselves well in tense situations, and calling on them to talk during a difficult situation, asking them what they think, eliciting their ideas. Who are the people who can get the brain going, get that prefrontal cortex going.
Mm.
That's the goal, really, is to try to shift the effort into a more thoughtful place, because that then down regulates the amygdala and the sort of the anxious response. It can. And so encouraging that kind of functioning where people's brains are sort of calming down is, I think, useful. Taking a break, saying a prayer, saying, this is a hot mess. Let's just take a break and have a prayer. But yeah, taking a break from the meeting, having people go for a walk, regrouping and coming back to something, tabling it for a while. There's all kinds of different ways to
Yeah.
manage it.
I think you need to get the gym day out for those meetings, you know.
Yes. Yes. If I know it's going to be a stressful meeting, I can get the drum circles out for everybody. Yeah. Yeah. I've never done
Uh,
that. I think though that probably could be useful for a group to begin their meetings that way. Yeah, it would be interesting to see how productive that could be. Yeah.
uh, John, have you thought about, or do you think about, do you see a connection or an intersection point between systems theory this systemic way of thinking and spirituality
Mhm.
or religion.
Oh yeah, for sure. Um, yeah, gosh, I have so many thoughts about that. I'm just trying to think about like what to even talk about. I mean, on the sort of the normal side of the spectrum of that, people certainly find their faith to be a calming experience in their life in difficult times. It's a source of strength and comfort for folks.
Mhm.
Um, so I think there's that aspect to it. I think in a more technical sense, there's something about prayer that's really useful for people in terms of their own functioning or ability to function. Um, and some people have like spiritual directors who kind of help walk them through their spiritual life, sort of like a coach, how they want to
Mhm.
how they want to show up spiritually, what's important to them, how they're functioning in their own spiritual lives. I certainly think that the way that the cosmos is, I don't know, structured or the way the universe is, there's certainly a lot more going on than what we're tuning into and know. I think that's becoming increasingly clear. Um, and whether or not that's some sort of spiritual reality, I don't know. But there's certainly something there. I'm trying to stay out of the jargon of my United Methodist heritage. I could certainly talk ad nauseum about how I think about spirituality. I will say one thing about it. United Methodists have this understanding that, and we're a Protestant denomination, but there's this understanding that everybody has sort of their personal
Mhm.
spiritual lives, but there's also a communal social life. Um, and some of those overlap, so people can have their own spiritual practices, which are important. I think when we talk about managing ourselves in the midst of a system, having your own spiritual practice is a part of that.
Mhm.
There's also corporate stuff where we worship together, pray together, study together, but also help other people together. And I think those ways are sort of acknowledging the systems that we're in, and bringing the values and beliefs that we have into the broader systems. One of the challenges I think for folks is just being clear about their values and beliefs
Mhm.
as a spiritual practice, and then living those out in some form of integrity out into the broader society. I think that's a deeply spiritual experience. If you ask people what's one belief you have related to your faith that's important to you, it can be challenging for people to be able to articulate that. They sort of have a sense of it, but not a lot of clarity or depth to it. And I think the extent to which people have sort of a clarity of depth to it, um, I think that's a deeply spiritual experience that other people experience as well as being sort of spiritual. When you hear somebody talking very deeply about a subject, that seems like a very spiritual experience in some ways. And I said normal. I was thinking there's sort of what we tend to call sort of is not normal, which is these sort of psychological experiences that people have, whether it's like in schizophrenia or paranoia, or or even like people have sense of ESP or other presence with them. I I'm sort of becoming convinced over time that those are not necessarily out of the normal range, that people are sort of tuning into something else that's present. And there's
Mhm.
some research that's going on about this. I can't cite what that is at the moment, but people are studying in terms of these sort of supernatural capacities that people have and are tuned into. Um, I think that we either don't have sort of the mechanics or the hardware to really understand that yet, but that it's sort of part of the evolution that we're in, that we're starting to really have a more connections to something else that's going on around us. I don't know. I'm not probably
Mm.
articulating that very well, but it's just sort of this hunch that I have.
No, it sounds like you're articulating it pretty well. What's you said earlier, it's becoming more and more evident. Is this what you were talking about? That we're getting kind of these stories, research, evidence for it? Or were
Yeah,
you
I
thinking
mean,
something else?
yeah, no, I mean, something is going on all the time, and how do you explain that? But um, we're not all having the same experiences. But there's something going on, or there's always something out there. But um, you can talk to people who sort of their energy is not necessarily um, it's almost as if their focus is not on other human beings, but in a different direction.
Mm,
And so they're sort of being pulled in another direction, away from sort of the intensity of the world that we're living in. And they're having these other experiences. And they're very powerful. I don't know that that's necessarily something cognitively wrong with folks. I mean, it certainly disrupts their ability to function in the society in what we would call a normal way, um, but there is something going on there, that they're picking up on something that the rest of us aren't picking up on. And I don't know how you explain that. But we treat it as if it's a problem, and not treating it as a part and parcel of being human, you know.
mm,
Um, and that there's, I think, something we could learn from it, if we stop treating it as a problem. Certainly, some people have a hard time functioning. I'm not disagreeing with that.
yeah,
But there's also something else going on too.
yeah. I, I hear that. I think in general, there's something in the air that we're breathing, in the water that's, and I'm not, by that I just mean in what's going on around the world that I don't know. I get the sense that people are tuning in to, or wanting more, I should say.
Hmm.
Uh, they're looking to other places than just the material
Hmm.
world. You
Yeah.
know, have you seen an increase in your in the churches that you know, in people going back to the church?
Yeah, really, it's really fascinating. I'm glad you asked that. So what's been happening in the last probably 40 or 50 years is this steady decline in worship attendance, excuse me,
Hmm.
an interest, a steady decline in interest for folks. And so lots of churches have been closing, congregations have been closing, and I think it's kind of across the board in different faith communities. It's not just Protestant or Christian or Catholic. Um, the struggle has been, how do you connect with folks and invite them back in, or do something that would sort of pique people's interest to want to be more engaged in their spiritual life at a corporate level. But what's been fascinating is a lot of churches are struggling to have any kind of children or youth presence, particularly youth. I grew up in a day, it was a huge youth group. I think we had like 80 kids in youth group, and lots of people have good or bad memories of youth group. Uh, but I've had three conversations or I've heard three different stories. I had an encounter with somebody, a young man who was 26, who's Catholic, Roman Catholic, and was asking me about what is United Methodism. And then I said, well, why are you like going to serve? Like, why are you going to mass? Like, why, what, nobody your age is doing that. And he said, no, that it was very important to him, the morals that he was learning, the values he was learning, and that he found them really useful, and that he now surrounds himself only with people who go to church with him. That's his group of friends, and they sort of help each other navigate the world. And then I had another conversation with a family member in the church whose grandson is just didn't really grow up in church, but has sort of blossomed into this faith experience. And they're trying to nurture that along. And they've just sort of come to faith sort of on their own. And then I had somebody, a young person, actually start coming back to church. Their parents, I think, didn't really go much, or they went to a different uh, denomination or whatever. But he started to come back because he's got all these questions, and he's, middle of high school years. And certainly that happens historically over time. You get kids who, get really interested in their faith, and that's not unusual. But I seem to be hearing more and more stories of that. And so it's interesting to think about that the tide is maybe sort of turning, that kids who grew up and didn't grow up in a church, but have a sense that there is sort of organized religion and are curious about what kind of benefit that would be or useful, are actually starting to head back to the
Mm,
churches. And I don't know if that's the case, but it certainly makes sense to me that these things ebb and flow, that people seem to kind of move in and out of these spaces in life generationally. So I don't know. I certainly am seeing examples of it.
yeah.
And yeah.
Well, I also wonder. Well, first of all, I've seen similar things with people around me, and in the churches in my area, and I've heard similar things. Um, I also think this what we've been talking about today, taking responsibility for oneself, for that there's always, even though you're influenced and impacted by the past, you have a choice in the present and how you
Mhm.
move forward. I think that's an inherently spiritual idea,
Mhm.
you know.
Yeah, I
Uh,
think so. Yeah, I
so,
would agree. Yeah.
you know, for what it's worth.
No, I think so. I mean, I think I like to think about spiritual maturity. And the people who seem to be the clearest and even clear about what they don't know, but who are intentionally trying to understand who they are, who God is, what they believe, what's important to them. I experience those folks as deeply spiritual people. Um, and even the people who may not have a spiritual home or claim
Mhm.
any kind of religious faith, maybe they're atheists or even agnostic, but people who are like deep thinkers about the world, we experience them as very spiritual people. I just think there's something to that. I think that's probably the best of religion is the ways in which it encourages people to be good thinkers about what they believe and then to live that out. And I don't know if this is true. I've been thinking that with the decline of organized religion, we seem to be having a problem with values and morals in society in general, and getting into some really bad behaviors, or at least tolerating some really bad behaviors. And I'm certainly not like a holy roller. I'm not like professing like everybody live a pure life at all. It's not even close to what I think, but I do think that institutionally, the church is the only institution within communities that lifts up important beliefs and values and then holds people to them. The church is sort of a place that tries to hold other institutions to accountability for what they say that they believe and are doing and that they're doing it. And so you often see the church involved in social issues because it's the only institution that says, well, you said that this is important to you. And so we're holding you accountable to that because that's what you
Mm,
say you believe. And I think that someone who's being responsible is holding other people to be responsible to what they say they believe and living that out. And I think that is
mm.
a spiritual experience.
Yeah, I would be on board with that, John. Speaking of living it out, I got to tell the story of when I met you. We were at a conference in DC, and you invited. I didn't know anybody. I think I had met you earlier in the day, and you said, "Come on, come to dinner with us." And you took me to dinner, and you bought me a drink, and you just made me feel like part of the crew. And I'll never forget that. I think that's one thing. that's really helpful to do as human beings. Just stay connected.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
Yeah, thank you
so
for
thank
saying
you
that.
for that.
Yeah, you're
Yeah,
very welcome. Yeah, no,
yeah,
I think it's important. I mean, that's a good testimony of why it's important to stay connected and to work at it.
absolutely.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. And how connection can support individual effort.
Hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
and John, just to close up, what gives you hope, or what's something that you look to that you find hope in,
Mhm.
hopeful, something
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah. Oh, great question. Actually, we're the church that I'm at is in this series right now. It's called Moving from Lament to Hope. So we've been talking about all the things that we lament in the world and what's happening, and people have had a chance to really articulate that for themselves. And now we're moving into hope and talking about what
Mm,
gives us hope. Um, I have a very sort of generic religious answer to that, which is that, my understanding of God is that God is always with us. So I'm always very hopeful because I have a sense that God is always with us. Um, but in terms of humans, I'm watching kind of what's going on in the US right now and what's going on around the world. And I see stories of people who are trying to come together to help one another and to care for one another and protect one another. And that gives me hope that there's a lot of good humans out there who are doing a lot of good work that nobody knows about. Um, and yeah, I mean, in the congregation that I'm in here, I see a lot of great things that they do, a lot of ways that they help people. So I think there's this spirit that's still very pervasive of where people want to take care of each other. They just need some encouragement. And so yeah, I'm hopeful. I don't know how optimistic I am, but I'm pretty hopeful.
I like that distinction. I might not be optimistic, but I'm hopeful. You know,
Yeah, I mean,
I think I
someday we'll come out of this, but I don't know when that'll be. Yeah.
yeah. Well, I think one challenge is that the people that you're talking about that are out there living their beliefs with integrity, uh, they're not putting it on the internet and taking selfies.
Right, right,
They're just doing it.
right,
Uh,
right. Yeah. I mean,
um,
that's a great question to be asking people in your family, what gives you hope, right? Like
uh,
what are you hopeful for? Where do you see hope? How do what gets you up in the morning? Those are great questions to ask people in your families.
yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
Well, we'll keep asking.
Yeah.
Thank you, John. Thank you
Oh,
so
thank
much for
you.
being here.
Yeah, enjoyed this. Thoroughly enjoyed this. Thanks for the invitation.
Me too.